Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how charities can get the most out of PR. I'm Sarah Griggs, and I'm a partner in the serious injury team at the London office of Irwin Mitchell. I'm also a trustee for my local Headway group, Headways London, so I've seen firsthand the value that really good PR can bring to a charity. And on that note, I'm going to give a plug out because it's Action for Brain Injury Week, so well done and thank you so much to all the amazing Headway groups out there who support survivors of brain injury every day. So this is a follow-up from our popular National Charities Conference that took place in February, where we explored how charities can adapt to economic challenges, both now and in the future. In that conference, our experts covered topics such as building and protecting your brand, the impact of Brexit, and what the post-pandemic opportunities are. So thank you to all of you who've joined us today and to those of you who submitted questions in advance. It's really, really helpful. You can carry on submitting additional questions throughout the session via the Q&A function on the screen, and we'll get to them at the end. When you do submit the questions, please do add in your name and email address. And in the event that we can't answer everything, we can always follow up directly afterwards. We're also going to be recording the virtual event, which we'll send out afterwards with copies of Sam's slides. Last housekeeping point is that at the end of the session, we'll be posting a feedback link. So please do take 2 minutes to complete it and let us know your feedback and give us any ideas of any other future webinars you'd be interested in us hosting. So today's focus is on PR, and we're delighted to welcome Sam Carlisle to speak to us on this vital topic. Good PR can have a massive impact on charities in terms of fundraising and raising profile, and we're really delighted that Sam can join us today. Sam is the Director of Cause Communications and provides communications and PR advice for charities and socially responsible companies. Sam has 25 years of experience with the national media and has worked with the BBC, Sky News, ITV News and all of the national press. Welcome today, Sam. We're really delighted you can join us. So over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Irwin Mitchell, for hosting this today, and thank you to everyone who's joined in. Hopefully you will get lots out of this session. So, as I said, this is about how charities can get the most out of PR. Next slide, please. So what we'll cover today, we're going to look at PR and how to do it on a budget. I think we've got lots of people from different size charities, so hopefully there'll be something in this for everyone. But it's been a really tough 18 months for charity budgets, with fundraising cut and events closed and shops closed. So we all know how tight budgets are, so hopefully we'll help you get enough bang for your buck, so to speak. I will also talk you through how news desks work using my experience and what they're looking for from PR and particularly working with charities. We'll have a quick look at national or local stories and how that works. And we'll look at how to harness your charity's material for PR. And then we'll also look at something that's particularly important when it comes to charity PR, the duty of care to your clients, and what working with the press means for them and how you can do your best to protect your end users. But as Sarah said, there'll also be time for some questions afterwards, and I'd really love to hear what you've got to say. Next slide. So about me. I am Sam Carlisle. I'm founder of Cause Communications, and we specialise in PR and media strategy for charities and socially responsible businesses. I was a journalist for 25 years, from a trainee reporter on the Yorkshire Evening Press to executive editor at The Sun. Now this picture was taken on my very first day in my role as a trainee reporter at the Yorkshire Evening Press. And I was sent all keen as mustard down to York Racecourse, where the circus had set up. The circus had come to town. And I think this story is a really good example of how to get PR by a bit of lateral thinking and on absolutely no budget. So I was sent down because the circus had contacted the news desk and said, "We're in town and our knife thrower needs a new assistant. Would you like to send one of your reporters down to try out for the job?" So I got sent. So I went down with a photographer, we chatted to the ringmaster, we chatted to the knife thrower, got all the information, got when they were there, how long they were there for, what time they were open for, how people could buy tickets, but also all the gen on how to be a knife thrower's assistant. And then they strapped me to the knife thrower assistant's board, and they actually threw the knives and spun the wheels. So the wheel was going around and knives were being flung at me, and I was absolutely terrified. The photographer got some amazing pictures. There's some more of me looking more scared than you would ever imagine, upside down with knives winging their way towards me. Anyway, so rushed back to the news desk, really excited, and said to them, I did it, I got the story and the pictures are amazing. And the news editor looked at me ashen-faced and said, what do you mean you did it? You weren't supposed to do it, we're not covered for insurance. So I learned a lot that day about how journalism works, how you stunt up stories, but also how you can get PR on a really small budget. So that made a page lead in the local paper. It was on the front page of the paper, and everyone was happy, apart from my news editor. So after that, I moved up through the nationals, and I've worked on any number of papers and magazines. But throughout my career, I've always loved coming up with ideas, interviewing people, writing to deadline, and really particularly working on campaigns with charities. Next slide. So my most high profile and successful campaign as a journalist was Give Me Shelter. Now this came about because I was featured editor at The Sun at the time, and we had a lunch with Yvette Cooper from the Labour Party, and I noticed that when she mentioned the fact that 2 women a week are killed every week in a domestic violence incident, the editor's eyebrow raised ever so slightly, and I thought, he doesn't know that statistic, that's a new statistic to him. So as features editor, I had a relationship with the charity Women's Aid, and one of my reporters had mentioned that that the number of shelters for women had been closing because they weren't getting the right funding. So I mentioned to the editor that it would be a really good campaign to get the funding for shelters sorted out, to get the way they were funded sorted out, and just to raise awareness of this statistic. So we worked really closely together, and we came up with this campaign, Give Me Shelter. And the great thing about this was we ran the picture of every woman who'd been killed in a year, and it was really powerful to see all of those women's faces, because you never ever get to see that, and also to show how many different women were killed. So women from all different backgrounds, all ages. And we ran the pictures on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. And to go with that, we ran their stories. We had a celebrity involvement because Julie Walters, the actress, is an ambassador for Women's Aid. We had first-person pieces from Polly Neat, who at the time was the chief executive of Women's Aid. We went behind the scenes of a refuge, which at the time was really unusual, and it was really successful. We kept it going for weeks and weeks and weeks. Almost too quickly, George Osborne, who was then Treasurer, gave us, Chancellor of the Exchequer, sorry, gave us £5 million, or gave Women's Aid £5 million, but we kept it going because there was more to this campaign. So there was a simple ask, there was a very snappy headline, and there was a kind of creative way of presenting an issue that a lot of people didn't want to read about. And there was lots of kind of different elements to the campaign. Last month, the Domestic Abuse Act became law. So, and Theresa May at the time said that one of the elements that got that law passed was this campaign. So I'm incredibly proud of that work. So that's a really good example of how PR, how working with the media can help a charity and help an issue. Next slide, please. The other part of my life is my daughter Elvie. This is Elvie. She is 19 and is one of only a handful of children, young adult now, to be diagnosed with the rare genetic condition RCDP. So I'm a carer as well as a journalist and a comms specialist. So Elvie's condition is life-limiting. It impacts our entire family. And I chose, when Elvie was about 4, to write about how hard it is not only to bring up a child. It's not ever the disability that makes it hard, it's the lack of support, it's the lack of acknowledgement of what you're doing, it's the way the system doesn't really work around you. So I thought, I have a voice, I have some power here, I can explain to people what it's like, and I can start campaigning to make a difference in this world. So Elvie is the driving force behind my disability rights campaigning and my activism. Her story also means I know what it's like to be a parent telling their story. I know what it's like to be a journalist writing a family story, and a PR consultant offering support and guidance on how to get the most out of stories and PR. It was a really difficult decision to write about Elvie, but I made it because this is a really shocking story, but there was a family that drove off Beachy Head with their young boy in the back of the car, the body of their young boy, and he was disabled. And it upset me so much and it angered me so much that people didn't understand what would have made them do that. So that was the decision I made, and I thought I need to use my skills to let more people know about this and to help families. Next slide, please. So how to get maximum coverage for minimum cost. Let's have a look at the key elements of PR. Obviously, the point of PR is to share stories via the media, to increase awareness of your charity, therefore to increase fundraising and engagement, and to build trust in your brand. Also to let people you want to attract know that you are there, end users, clients. So what is PR? It's not advertising. You're not paying for media coverage. If you want to pay for media coverage, you take out an advert, and it would cost £40,000 to get a page in a national newspaper, but you would guarantee a space, you would guarantee your message, you would guarantee your logo, the headlines, and absolutely everything you want to get across. But it's expensive. And it's also noticeable that advertising isn't as trusted as editorial, which is the news pages, the features pages online or in print, or obviously if you're on TV, TV news reports. It's also not social media, which you create, but it can work hand in hand with social media, which we'll come to later. So it's important to be realistic and remember that media outlets and journalists want to cover your stories, but you're not in control of the end product. So we'll talk later about how to increase your control over that process. But as I said, the trust that people put in news coverage is huge, and by placing your story in the media, you get the reach, and you can also get their social reach as well. So you almost piggyback on the back of a newspaper's reach. If they put something on Facebook, if they put something on Twitter, you're again going to magnify that audience. Next slide. So what do news desks want? This is a picture from the film Sweet Smell of Success. It's a 1950s movie and it's absolutely brilliant. It shows a press agent trying to inveigle his way into the life of a columnist. Tony Curtis is the press agent, and it brilliantly shows the sort of love-hate relationship between journalists and PR. Journalists like to think that they're out and about meeting people and getting stories that way. Great contacts, in they go, and they have a slightly snobby attitude to PR. However, reporters need stories, they need content, and in the digital age more so than ever. And as a charity, you are sitting on a wealth of stories. You are there at the coalface, you know what's happening in your world, you have access to people, and you can make life for reporters much easier. Next slide, please. So increasingly, news desks are under-resourced. The Evening Standard cut their staff by a third last year. BBC Regional cut 450 jobs last year across the country. So it's becoming more and more difficult for journalists who are possibly covering 4 or 5 different beats. So they might be writing about health, they might be writing about climate change, they might be writing about historical buildings. So it's a lot for individuals to cover. So they've got this difficulty where there's fewer journalists, but also more content needed, because digital is a voracious monster that eats content. So even with, as prestigious organisations like the BBC, they are cutting the numbers of journalists. So as I said, 24-hour digital news means a greater appetite than ever for stories. So if you can serve up a package that limits the amount of work journalists do, then all the better. So how do you make them take notice of your story in the first place? Next slide. So I'm going to go through the diary of a press release. So assuming you know that this is the basic way of reaching a journalist, this is like route 1. So you would write a press release event about a thing, or a guest coming to your charity, or a survey that you've done, or a fantastic story that you've had from one of your clients. Whatever it is, it's basically the same process that this follows. So I'm going to go through the diary of a press release. These timings change depending on the media outlet. So if you're digital, it's still the same, but stories get published to you the day. So I'm going to base this on print media for the moment. But TV newsrooms work in the same way. They receive a press release, they work on the story, and then they take it to an editor. So bear that in mind as I go through this slide. So Monday morning, you write your email with your press release attached or embedded in the email, which is much better. The reporter receives the email. Now, when I was features editor on The Sun, I got 500 emails a day, and many of those, probably 400 of those, were from PRs. That was press releases. So it was a lot to filter through. So the person who receives the email chooses the release from maybe organisations that they know or trust. So you're going to go to the ones that you know already, that you've worked before, or that you know have a great name and a great reputation, and you want to work with them, or with a great story in the subject line. I'll come back to this in a minute. Monday afternoon, the reporter writes the story, or chooses stories from those that he wants to write, or she writes the story from the information within the press release, or they might need more information and case studies, or more quotes or pictures, for example. So that's when they'll get in touch with you. They'll either email you or ring you. So at that point, you need to be ready to be able to answer those questions. You need to have case studies that are willing to talk, ready to go. You need the information, or know who to go to for the information. You don't need everything in your head or on your laptop. It's, you need to just be able to access that information, and also have some photography, or if they want video, think about that before you send the press release. So next, this is what happens within the newsroom. So the reporter sort of writes an outline of the story. They know what they want to say. Then they have to sell that story to the news desk. So if you imagine there's about 30 reporters, say, in an organisation, there might be 5 people on the news desk. So each of those reporters are feeding into the news desk the stories that they've got that day. The news desk then has to filter through those stories. So basically, you're selling, again, the story that you've sent them, the reporter is selling to the news desk. If it's digital, it might get published then and there. If it's not embargoed, an embargo is a time limit on a story. Say you're lucky enough to have the Duchess of Cambridge, don't we all wish that would happen, visit your charity, then there'd probably be an embargo on the press release, so that everyone does the story at the same time. Or if if there's an event, then obviously that would get embargoed. So then on Tuesday morning, the news desk, having decided which of those stories that is feeding through from the reporters that they feel are the most important of the day, they create a news list. So that cuts it down to about the top 30 stories, say. They then take that news list into morning conference. This happens in most organisations. So it might be, if it's a newspaper, there'll be a conference in the morning, and the features department will provide a list, the sports department and the news desk, and then all those stories are talked about, discussed, and then the priority of those stories is decided. Some at that point will get cut because they won't make the grade. The editor might not like them, but most will go through. So again, it's another selling process. So the news desk is selling your story again. And if the editor says yes, the story is subbed for the paper. And again, there might be more queries from the sub-editors who basically go through, check the facts, write headlines, either put it online or get it ready for printing. So this works the same within TV. So it might be that a TV reporter gets sent out at point 4 to go and interview someone. But it's basically the same process and the same hierarchy. And then hopefully Wednesday morning, the story is published, the charity gets a higher profile, the paper's happy, you've made a contact, and hopefully everyone's happy. Next slide, please. So how do you influence those points? So first of all, your press release and your story. Ensure your story is newsworthy. So there's lots of different elements to this, and I'll go through these in a bit more detail in a minute. Is it unusual? There's a great saying in news amongst reporters, is it a Hey Doris story? And this has been true for years. A Hey Doris story is something that perhaps you'd be sitting in the canteen at work at lunchtime, or you're looking on your phone. Would you go like either literally, hey Doris, have you seen this? Or would you share it? That's the modern equivalent of a Hey Doris story. Doris is quite an old-fashioned name, but yeah, that's the modern equivalent. So that's the kind of unusualness of a story. Does it affect lots of people? If you're working with a cancer charity, perhaps it's like widespread. The flip side of that is looking at how maybe it's a taxpayer issue, because everyone pays tax who's working. So it might affect lots of people financially if something isn't done. So that's a way of like looking at a story. If we don't put early years prevention into nurseries, say if you're working with a nursery charity, it will cost taxpayers this much later on. So that can still affect a lot of people, even though it's at the point only affecting a few. Do you have compelling case studies? This is really important. Is it an emotive story? Does it make people want to care about the charity because of the clients that you have? We'll come back to this again in a minute. Celebrity involvement, always a tricky one, but yeah, I'll talk a bit more about that again later. And does it fit the outlet's agenda? So lots of papers or online news websites have particular like political leanings, so it's worth sort of keeping in mind where they sit politically. The Mirror Group is more left-wing, the Sun, the Sunday Times more right-wing, Telegraph more right-wing, Daily Mail more right-wing. So just have a think about that when you're thinking where to place a story. Is it exclusive? I'll talk a little bit more about this again in a minute. And is it shareable? So again, that's the modern day version of Hey Doris. So point 2. So this is where the journalist is filtering through all those emails. So what is going to make it punchy for them? Make your press release short and to the point. It's really, really important that you do that. And the first thing you do, the first place you do that is in your subject headline. You need to make that punchy. It needs to be a headline that would possibly appear in a paper, or the tagline that you would see on a digital piece, or you know, the coming up thing they do on BBC News, or the first line of a story on a TV news item. So that's basically the very, very core of your story and the very, very core point of what you want to get across. Don't try and get too many things into that subject line. Hit them with an impressive fact or a startling trend, or, you know, or just the thing that, if it's a simple event, just the facts of the event. If you've got a celebrity, make sure that name goes in that header. Then once they've opened the press release, as I said, keep it short and to the point. They don't have time to read reams and reams. I mean, 2 pages max, definitely. Make sure that all the details are in there: who, what, where, when, why, so that they've got enough information. Remember, you're providing a package to them to give them the least amount of work that they have to do, so they can get more stories done, so they can work on this straightforwardly and quickly and accurately. If you can get a snappy quote from your chief executive, put that in there, and a snappy quote from someone, a client perhaps, that you, if there's a family that you're suggesting for the story, get a really snappy quote from them in there, just 1 paragraph. Again, put the best fact in your subject line, and then triple check your accuracy, because it's a little bit disconcerting, because journalists will always notice if something's not quite right in the grammar. But just get someone to read it through a couple of times before you send it out. And then the third point was about journalists going to people that they know already and trusting them. So this is quite crucial. It's not 100% necessary, because obviously you're always building new relationships. But what I would say is reach out and meet journalists. That doesn't mean you have to go clubbing with them. It can just be like a quick phone call. When you haven't got a story, email them and just say, especially locally, do you want to meet up for a coffee? Do you want to, you know, can I have a quick phone call with you to explain what my charity does? Quite often from those conversations come ideas that the journalist might want to, you might not think it's a story, but the journalist might want to pursue in greater detail. It's a really good opportunity. If there's face-to-face meetings, they just build those relationships. They're really important. If there's a chance for bigger charities, book a day when you're in London or Manchester, where the media hubs, try and sort of make contact with 3 or 4 journalists at the BBC, say in Manchester, or at Sky and the BBC, and News UK in London. Just spend a day where you put in maybe 5 appointments. Now that we can meet up again, obviously this only works if you can meet up, but you could do this on a Zoom calls or phone calls, but preferably meeting up. So you'll buy them a coffee and just explain what your charity does. And if there's a particular thing that you want to get them to write about, that's the moment to talk to them. And then they will remember you, that you'll be in their contacts book, and they're more likely to open that email from you the next time. So how do you find the journalists? That's where Twitter and LinkedIn are your friends. So if you go through, say, BBC Health correspondents on LinkedIn, there's a lot there that you'll find their details on there. A lot of journalists have Twitter direct messages open, so that's really valuable, because you can say, direct message them, just say, look, I work for this charity, I think you might be interested in this. You know, we've got several stories coming up, would it be possible to have a call? They might not get back, but you know, if you hit quite a few of them, some of them will. Yes, next slide please. So we mentioned news organisations' agenda. At Cause, we work with environmental scientist Angela Terry and One Home, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise who want to spread the word about climate change. Now, we noticed that News UK, who published The Sun, I don't always work with The Sun, I'm just giving you examples from The Sun at the moment. News UK had recently done some audience research that showed that green stories were appealing to their readers and advertisers. So we suggested to them that they do a green week in the paper, which would explain to readers. Readers were interested, but they wanted to know more about the subject, what they could do personally. So with this green week, the idea was to explain to people at home how they could make small changes to contribute towards climate change, stopping climate change. That would be wrong. So we worked with them for weeks beforehand, and we did a whole week's worth of content, digital and print, and it was absolutely brilliant. We got on the front page 4 days that week. We had pages within the paper, so we had to think laterally about how this would look. We had spreads on, inside your home, what you could do. We had spreads on how to talk to your children about climate change. We had opinion pieces from Angela, from celebrities. We got Paul McCartney to write about Meat-Free Monday, so everyone could go vegetarian for 1 day a week, which, because that's a cause close to his heart, he was happy to do. We even got Jeremy Clarkson to go green for a day in his column. He sort of actually said, I am worried about this now, which was a major, major deal. But it was a really good working relationship. And it's because we noticed that survey stat that they'd put out in their paper, so we could sort of jump on that and say, right, here, look, we can give you all this material about how to go green and why you should go green for your readers. And it was a really, really positive experience, and it also positioned Angela as a leading green expert going forward. Next slide, please. So I talked about exclusivity. If a media outlet this is where a media outlet is the first or only to publish, all journalists want something that's unique. So the way that you can do that is either only give one journalist a story, so they will give it a bigger show because it's exclusive, and more likely to publish it because it's exclusive, or you can give them different angles on the same story. So we've worked with the Disabled Children's Partnership for 3 years. The Disabled Children's Partnership is an umbrella organisation of more than 80 charities now. I think there are a couple of people from charities that are involved with that online. So the organisation has many stories which have been told before, and so we had to make sure that we had different ways of telling this story. The idea behind the partnership is to increase funding for children, increase the support, and make sure that the system works for them. So in this example, we took Layla's story, and we gave it to the Times, and we gave them new stats from a survey that we were running. And we got a lovely double-page spread in the Times, and it went online as well. So exclusives help to build relationships with journalists and usually increase the size of coverage that you get from one media outlet. Next slide, please. Shareability. So stories that are likely to generate sharing and comments. This is the Hey Doris factor again. Would you tell a friend or a family about this story? If you would, then it's likely that more people will engage in it and share it as well. So again, this is a good way of, the example I'm going to give you is a good way to create shareable content, because it works for digital and print, but it also then becomes shareable as an element of social media. So we were asked, this was the very first thing we were asked to do when we set up Cause in 2017, and it was working with a really small charity called CGD Society. And they had a young boy called Ali Kim, who's from Oxford, and he was of Korean heritage, and he was desperately in need of a stem cell transplant. But the Korean population tends not to be that forthcoming in being tested as stem cell donors. So his family were trying to increase the awareness amongst the Korean community, and particularly on this occasion for a donor drive in New Malden, which is home to the largest Korean population in Europe. So they came to us and said, what can we do? And we thought about it, and we thought, well, who's the most famous Korean in this country? And we decided it was Heung-min Son, or Son to his fans, the Tottenham Hotspur striker and South Korea international. So we approached Spurs and we said, look, this is a really unique ask, but do you think he would do it? And they brilliantly, amazingly put it to his management, to Son, and he agreed to do it. So we just really simply got him to film a video, and I'm going to show you that now. It's going to come in a minute. Bear in mind his English wasn't terribly good when we recorded this. Okay, that's not playing. So let's carry on. Maybe show it later. So basically, it was a oh, here we go.
Hello, I'm Heung-min Son from Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. I need your help for Ali Kim, and 2 years old Korean boy who loves the football. Ali is sick at a hospital in London. He needs a stem cell transplant to save his life. If you're Korean, please get tested. Thank you.
So that was Son. I now can't see the slides, so I'm just going to see what happens. No. So after that video went out, we were inundated with Koreans who wanted to come forward. The video got picked up on digital worldwide, and in news organisations. So the story went out here first. It got put on digital platforms and then shared widely. And you'll be pleased to know that Ali got his stem cell transplant, and the family, although they don't know that who the donor is, they said that the film was shared so many times in China, like millions of times in China and in Korea, that was what brought a donor forward. And I still can't see slides, so I'm just ad-libbing. Oh no. Sorry about this.
Hi everyone, we're just going to take a very quick pause to try and get Sam access back to her slides again.
Thank you.
Please bear with us. Thanks to whoever confirmed that you can still see the slides okay, that's really helpful.
It's just me then.
The key person, Sam.
What I should have is a version.
Sam, you've covered some amazing things already, and it's been absolutely incredibly helpful. I'm mindful of time, and in fact, we've actually already got a lot of questions coming in. If we can't get the slides back, would you be happy to move on to the questions, because we're going to be circulating your slides afterwards?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, let's do that.
Is that okay? We've already got some pre-submitted questions, which I'll go through, and some really interesting questions in the chat, lots of which is stemming on from what you've already discussed. The first question that we've got, pre-submitted one, so thank you very much for those, is how do we work out the impact of a release and the reach of it? Is that something that you pay or subscribe to?
Yeah, there's you can subscribe to organisations like we use Cision, which is CISION, which gives you a
I'm afraid to say, everyone, I think that poor Sam has frozen. We might be having a bit of an IT difficulty. We'll give her a few minutes to try and come back. In the meantime, Lisa, do you mind maybe going through the slides so everyone can see them? Might just be useful for us to flick through them. I find this really, really fascinating, especially the Hey Doris story, knowing what appeals to the public and those kind of issues that just really appeal. It's really, really fascinating, both with my trustee of a charity head on, and also as a solicitor, the kind of stories that our clients like to get out there. So it's really interesting to hear what appeals to everybody and just gauging that public interest. It's fascinating. Now I've seen I'm trying to think of things that have always surprised me that people have been so interested in to know about. I had a client who learnt to speak for the first time after having very intensive speech therapy, and that was an amazing story to share. That the sort of work that rehabilitation can provide to people, it's absolutely amazing. Lisa, are we hearing anything from Sam about coming back?
No, I think it seems her connection has gone, unfortunately, and it seems to have disappeared.
Okay.
Let's just give it another minute or so. I'll perhaps put the slides back on.
Absolutely, yeah, put the slides on and we'll go through them. Yeah, going back to that press story, I'm afraid I'm quite naive about press, and I'm sure all of you will know more than me, but that particular story about that client of mine got on Lad Bible. And when our media team told me that, they were all full of excitement and joy, and I had no idea what Lad Bible was, but I think it got much better reach than we would have done if it had been in a local newspaper. So it's just really interesting to know of all the other different options that are out there for getting the story out that I would never have even thought of. It's fascinating. Sam, I think you're back. I think, can we unmute you?
I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened.
Oh, fabulous.
I've
been living not very well, so I'm very glad you're back.
Where did we get to?
We just finished the video, I believe. You talked about the amazing story, and I think we're on the slide after that.
Okay.
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
So anyway, Ali Kim's very, very healthy, and he had his stem cell transplant. So again, a bit of lateral thinking and working with media and sharing a story. Next slide, please. So celebrity, that was a good example of celebrity. Not everyone will have access to celebrities, but if you do have someone who's an ambassador or a trustee, if you have a supporter who's well known locally, when you sign them up, when you first talk to them about getting involved with a charity, ask if they will do press, ask if they will happily speak to journalists, and if they will, make sure they're really au fait with what your charity does, make sure they know all the messaging. If they're being interviewed, like 3 top lines that you want them to get out when they're talking to journalists. Celebrity endorsements obviously get shared massively on social and powerful ways of getting your message heard. And journalists are really, really interested in talking to celebrities because it gives them access that they might not normally have got. This is an example of a campaign we ran with STEM4, who are a mental health charity. They're quite small, but we created Youth Mental Health Day for them, and we got Oriel Romu from Southampton Football Club and Josh Widdicombe were amongst the people that we got involved. Luke Chadwick, who was a former Manchester United and England player, he had talked about his mental health issues, so we asked him if he'd like to get involved, and he was involved in the video as well. So those 2 clubs started sending out social around it. We got coverage in First News, which is the children's newspaper, which goes out to sort of end of primary, early secondary age group children. It's the fastest growing print publication in the country. So that was amazing. That was really good. We got a front page campaign out of that with them. Next slide. So local or national, this is kind of obvious, but choose your audience. National press is not always better, depending on what you want to achieve. National coverage achieves a wider audience, but the threshold for stories is higher, meaning it has to be a really good story or a really good fact or a really good celebrity endorsement or a great case study. So work out what you want to achieve. If your project runs in a specific regional area and your goal is to increase awareness and referrals, that might be better for you. Also remember national sites like HuffPost UK or Indie Voices. If there's someone that you could get to write a powerful opinion piece for you, perhaps your chief executive or a client, they're really worth using as well. And again, lots of content needed for those. Next slide, please. So how to harness your charity's stories. I'm racing through now. Next slide. Look for people and their stories, people you've supported, who've had successful journeys with your charity, positive experiences with a programme or service. I've given this example of Channel 4 dispatches because this was when we worked with Women's Aid, we went behind the scenes of a women's refuge, and then when Channel 4 came to them to ask if they would like to do dispatches, the same refuge said, yeah, okay, we've had a positive experience with the press, so we can do that. And that enabled women to tell their stories, obviously anonymously and obviously carefully protected. But that was really powerful. And there was a train driver watching that programme who just thought, well, one of the problems here is that women can't escape from a violent home and they don't have the money quite often to escape. So what if we had a relationship with domestic abuse charities where women could safely travel on trains away from a violent situation? And that is now the case. So that came out of that ability to talk to media. Arrange meetings with colleagues who work directly with service users. When we worked with Shooting Star Children's Hospice, we had a meeting with the doctors, the nurses and the kind of play therapists and all the people that worked with the families who were a bit nervous about press coverage, but we explained my story about the how empowering I felt to talk about my story and the benefits for the charity, but also for the families who quite often just want to just tell their story. So yeah, next slide, please. Emotion and empathy. So find new stories that haven't been told before or stories which have a new angle relevant to the news agenda. As I said, editors and audiences want new stories, but it's advisable not to keep sharing the same stories. So if you can find different users of your charity or different stories based around the same end goal, then that's really important. Stories are not simply a log of what's happening, they should be emotional and people should be able to empathise with what you're doing. So it's a lot about this. Is a lot about why should I support this charity, which you'll be used to through your fundraising. Next slide, please. So campaigns, if you want to work with a media outlet on a campaign, make it exclusive. As with Give Me Shelter, make the campaign a snappy title that says what it does. Make sure you can offer the paper lots of material, because if they run a campaign, it might be not a newspaper, it might be digital, but if they offer the paper lots of material, case studies, op-eds, opinion pieces, surveys, photography, video, and have a call to action for readers or viewers. And it's also really important to know that the campaign is winnable. So if you're working on a sort of, a general kind of approach to maybe fundraising. If there's a particular target that you want people to reach, the call to action for readers is to help raise that money, but to reach a certain goal. With this campaign that we did with this Disabled Children's Partnership, and again the Sun, this was called Give It Back, and it was about returning the 454 million shortfall that is in children's funding. So it was a specific target, and that campaign is ongoing. Next slide, please. Again, this is work with the Disabled Children's Partnership. So during the pandemic, although we had that campaign running, it was clear that families were struggling. Families were really suffering because their support was withdrawn, because they were managing children's medical care, social care, and the entire family's mental health. So we recommended in the first weeks of the pandemic that there should be surveys that capture that throughout the however long this experience was going to go on. And with that, we needed stories. So we had all these statistics. We had a great response from families, and the statistics were really stark, but we needed to put a face to those statistics. So we created a family panel where we could go and talk to families and sort of find out their stories. And then from that, we could work out different angles to give to different outlets. So this was one of my favourite pieces, and it was in the Sunday Times magazine. It was a fabulous 5-page feature which concentrated on the siblings of disabled children. So we worked with SIBS, the charity, a part of the DCP. We found 3 amazing case studies, some incredible kids who were doing great stuff for their families, and managed to get them photographed safely, and beautiful photography went with this. So last year we managed 75 pieces of national coverage, reached 23 million viewers or listeners, and millions of print readers. Next slide. Elvie again. So again, I'm a parent to a disabled child who has been interviewed by different media outlets, and I know so through this that lots of families want to talk and want to tell their stories, but I'm lucky because I know how the system works. So how do you protect those families? Next slide. Duty of care. Next slide. This is really crucial. So our best practice guide is to build consent into the PR and story gathering process. At every stage, check that your interviewees are happy to be put forward. Keep a password protected list of clients who are willing to be interviewed. Ask if there are certain outlets that they won't work with. So for example, some people are really nervous about doing TV or radio. So if you know that beforehand, you're not likely to promise a radio journalist an interview with someone that's not going to do it. Make sure that list is updated in case circumstances change. So it might be that you've offered a story about a particular incident with the family, but actually that doesn't exist anymore. So that then you'll have to let the journalist down. So make sure everything is in place before you offer a family up to a journalist. I'm talking about families all the time, but I know this can be individuals. The storyteller should also be aware of how and where their story will be shared, so just keep them as much in the loop as possible. And then perhaps create a document which lays out this process so that interviewees can easily understand what the process is and can consent. So they can sign a form that says, yeah, I understand this. Make sure that's simple and easy to understand. Next slide. So offering support throughout, share the text with the storyteller before you send it to a journalist or media outlet. Make sure the story that you have is definitely their story, that they're happy with quotes that you're going to give back, and agree to changes if they ask for them. Media may want to send their own journalists to interview people, so support the storyteller by making sure they know what to expect. Ask the journalist perhaps what they're going to ask, or what the photographer would like to see, if there's video involved, what they want to do, so there's no surprises for your storyteller. For print or digital journalism, now this is a really important thing that not many people know. You can ask for copy approval. So if you're offering a story to a journalist, they write it up, then at that point you can ask if you can look through the copy. And most journalists worth their salt will do this. And if it's a first person piece that they've written, say in the voice of someone, they will do that anyway because they want to get it right. They have a duty of care as well. They are covered by the editor's code of practice or Ofcom or whichever outlet it is. So they have strict guidelines themselves. They don't want to get this wrong. They want the facts right. And they don't want a complaint afterwards where an interviewee says, oh, you didn't quite get it right. So if you ask for copy approval, that will happen. What you won't get is headline approval. And that's sometimes where kind of, because you're telling a story in an even shorter space, that's sometimes where nuance is lost. Check in with the storyteller after the piece has been published, offer support, and perhaps create a WhatsApp group, Facebook group. So if you have a big clientele, that they can sort of discuss their experience and offer others support and say, oh, I wish I'd known this, or, you know, that was amazing, I really enjoyed doing it. There's also a right to be forgotten in GDPR. So you can ask for pieces to be taken down, and the outlet has to take that seriously if you ask. You can have a Google of that. I haven't really got time to go into it, but it's something that it's useful to know that exists. Next slide, please. And then finally, supporting a storyteller. This is Daniel, absolutely lovely Daniel. So we work with the charity Shift MS, which is a brilliant social media platform for young people and newly diagnosed people with MS. Daniel was diagnosed with MS at 15, and it was the same time that he was coming out as gay. So his story was quite nuanced, and we really wanted to get it right. The charity is young. It's a digital platform, so we went digital first. So we went to Metro Online, which has a huge audience, and it was also right in terms of age and format for the charity. So we interviewed Daniel, we wrote up the piece, and then we wrote it in his words, checked with him, he loved it, made some changes, some kind of changes in tone, that was fine. Then we sent it to Metro, Metro loved it, they kind of subbed it again for space and just for their style. So they sent it back to us, we sent it to Daniel, a couple of changes again, they made those changes, and it was shared digitally online and published. It was brilliant, it was absolutely brilliant piece. And Daniel felt so empowered by that. He's a really shy, amazing young man, but he started his own podcast now because he thought the experience was so positive. Next slide. So in closing, you are the experts, you know your charity, you know the people that you're reaching, or the building that you're protecting, or the pets that you are looking after. Have confidence, know that you have a voice here, and that you can get a voice for your clients. Thank you. Thanks very much for listening, and sorry about the tech nightmare.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was fantastic. Really, really great. Thank you. I think you're kindly able to stay for about another 10 minutes up until 1:15. So we will go through some of the questions if that's OK. We've had so many questions in the chat as well, so thank you so much for that. I'm afraid we're not going to get to all of them today, but Sam is very happy to pick up afterwards. So back to the first question, which we were in the process of going through. How do we work out the impact of a press release, the reach? And I assume this might be something that you pay or subscribe to.
Yeah, there are businesses out there like Cision. I think I started on the example of that, and you get a subscription, and that will give you immediate answer to that. You can put PR, you can put press releases through those services. They have lists of journalists which they update all the time, so that helps you find journalists' email addresses, for example. And then they will tell you how many people have read the press release, and they will give you an update of how many stories came from it.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. And this is a very interesting question, which I'm not sure you know the precise answer to, Sam. How much time per week should a charity devote to PR?
Depends on your budget and on how many staff you have. I mean, I would say I don't know, a couple of hours a week, where you can like build up those files of people that, or stories. I think that's really good to just keep going through thinking, well, that would be a good story, that would be, that's interesting. And then if there's a particular campaign, then obviously devote more time, but it really depends on size and scale. And yeah.
And following on from that, we've got another quite specific question: is what should you prioritise if you have a very small team?
I would say it depends if you're regional or national. I would say get those stories together, have that database of great case studies, go and meet the journalists. I would concentrate on that, and then kind of send out press releases when and if you can. If there's a story, you have to have a story, so don't do it all the time. You don't need to do it weekly even, but just have the kind of backup content there and the contacts for when you have a story, then you can concentrate on it.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. Which is the best social media platform to use for charity and fundraising engagements?
All of them, and it depends on your audience. So Snapchat, for example, much younger. Facebook tends to be older, but it does have a really good reach. So it just depends on who you are trying to reach as a charity. If it's younger people, Instagram. If it's a political thing or policy, I would say Twitter or LinkedIn as well.
Great. Thank you, Sam. I'm going to go through some of the questions we've got on the Q&A chat now. So thanks to Sean. I'm a trustee of an LGBTQ young persons charity. Many are vulnerable and not out to their parents. I wonder how to PR the organisation and their stories.
Okay, that's a really good question, and obviously really sensitive. You can always do anonymous stories. You can talk about people without giving their names. Journalists always prefer to use names, but if it's really secretive, then you can't. And also, you should, if they're under 16, then you can't tell their stories without their parents' permission. So it might be worth talking to people, getting a sense of what they're saying, and then perhaps, I don't know if you have the budget, but if you can create an animation around what they're saying, or even like, the most basic kind of picture caption story, not using them, but using you can get pictures from picture agencies like Shutterstock, where you get stock pictures that you can use, and maybe just use those as examples, and sort of create stories that are close to, but not exactly like the ones that you're dealing with every day. And surveys as well. Surveys are really important. So you can survey the young people that you are representing, and get trends or feelings or lines out of them from that.
Thank you, Sam. And Louise has put a really helpful, not so much of a question, but I can understand why the sort of support you need, Louise. You followed it up. It's clear that case studies and real life stories are fairly key to a good PR campaign. This has always been a problem for us. We're all about providing long-term supported housing for adults who suffer from enduring mental illnesses. And because of the stigma still attached to these issues, it's next to impossible to find anyone willing to share their story. Mostly families and carers who don't want to risk going public with their story because of possibly hurting their loved one. And she says, I appreciate that's not a question, but any advice would be welcome.
Yeah, again, it's a similar thing. It's just thinking creatively around. So it's almost like creating a story with the key things that the families say, but without using them particularly. So that kind of idea of an animation, or we have quotes from, or in this case, you could probably do an opinion piece from your chief executive and just say, look, this is a real issue, or one family told us, and get the quotes in that way. So you have an opinion piece which is about policy or fundraising, or where funding is going wrong for people with mental health issues. but you also bring in the real life experience by using kind of generalized quotes from people without naming the source of those quotes. It adds kind of real life colour and empathy to what could be quite a dry piece.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much to all of you who've attended today. I'm sorry for the bit of a glitch, but I think you'll all agree it's been an amazing session. It's been great, Sam. We're going to circulate Sam's slides afterwards, along with a copy of the recording. And Sam has very kindly said she's happy to take any inquiries directly. So thank you all again for attending. Please do fill in the feedback form if you can, and provide any suggestions for any future webinars. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.